The alarm cut through the chamber like a blade of sound, red light washing over 300 delegates who had, until that second, been arguing about trade routes. Chairs scraped back. Voices rose into panic. Somewhere above the Grand Assembly Hall, a hull seal had failed, and the station's automated voice repeated the same warning in 6 languages at once. Laura Whitmore did not stand up. She sat in the front row, hands folded on her lap, while beings twice her height pushed past her toward the exits. An Asari delegate knocked her data slate to the floor and did not stop to see if she was hurt. She picked it up herself, calmly, and set it back on her knee. "Everyone please," called Ambassador Farron Voss from the podium, his voice cracking through the translator. "Remain seated. Security teams are responding." Nobody remained seated. The stampede toward the doors grew worse, and in the crush, an elderly Kethrun elder named Yola Sarath stumbled and went down under the crowd's feet. Nobody stopped for her either. Laura moved then, but not toward the exit. She moved against the current, shoulder first, cutting a straight line through bodies twice her size until she reached the fallen elder. She got an arm under her and lifted her upright as if the woman weighed nothing at all. "Stay behind me," Laura said. "Walk when I walk." Yola stared at her, breath ragged. "The seal breach. They said hull failure. We could lose pressure in the east corridor." "We won't," Laura said. "That corridor is 3 decks from here. Panic kills faster than air loss does. Stay close." She said it with such flat certainty that the old woman actually believed her and stopped shaking. By the time the two of them reached the side exit, the crowd had thinned into a slow, choking bottleneck of bodies trying to fit through one door at a time. People were shouting. Somebody had fallen and was being trampled quietly, no one even noticing in the noise. Laura set Yola against the wall, out of the crush, then reached down and hauled the fallen man up by his collar before he could be stepped on again. "Move to the wall," she told him. "Follow the wall to the door. Don't fight the crowd, go around it." He obeyed. Around her, 3 or 4 more people had noticed there was suddenly one person in the room who was not panicking, and they started drifting toward her, the way lost things drift toward the only fixed point in a storm. An engineer's voice crackled over the comm system, tight and controlled. "This is deck control. We have confirmed hull breach in maintenance shaft 9. Automated seals have failed to engage. Repeat, automated seals have failed. All personnel evacuate corridor 7 and 8 immediately." Laura's head turned sharply toward the sound of that announcement, because corridor 7 ran directly beneath the very hall they were standing in. She looked at the crowd still jamming the main doors, looked at the ceiling, and made a decision in less than 2 seconds. "This way," she said, and pulled Yola and 3 strangers toward a narrow service door at the side of the stage, one that most of the delegates had probably never noticed, because it wasn't marked in their language. "That's a maintenance passage," said a young Thesaran aide named Corin Blake, hovering near her elbow, his voice shaking. "It isn't part of the evacuation route." "It isn't on your evacuation route," Laura said, already pulling the door open. "It leads to the lower ring, and the lower ring leads to the shuttle bay. Faster than fighting 300 people for one exit. Move." Corin hesitated only a second before following her into the dim service corridor, and the others came behind him, drawn by the same instinct that makes a herd follow whoever seems to know where the danger isn't. The corridor was narrow, lit by low amber emergency strips, and the air already tasted thin and metallic, like the station itself was holding its breath. Laura kept a steady pace, not rushing, checking behind her every few steps to make sure no one fell behind. "How do you know this ship?" Yola asked, still leaning slightly on her arm. "I don't," Laura said. "I read the deck schematics on the transit shuttle 3 days ago, out of habit. I do that everywhere I go. You learn where the exits are before you learn where the bathroom is." "That's a strange habit," Corin said. "Where I'm from, it's the only habit that matters." They reached a junction where the corridor split in 2 directions, one marked with a faded arrow toward the lower ring, the other unmarked and sealed with a heavy door. From behind that sealed door came a low groan of metal under pressure, deep and slow, like something enormous shifting its weight. Laura stopped walking. "What is that?" Corin whispered. "Structural stress," Laura said. "The breach isn't just venting air. Something's pulling at the frame." She pressed her palm flat against the cold metal, feeling for a vibration only she seemed to notice. "This whole section is going to buckle. We need to be past it before it does." "How long do we have?" Yola asked. "I don't know. That's why we're not standing here talking about it." She led them at a faster pace now, past the sealed door, down a short ramp, until the corridor opened into the wider space of the lower ring, where dozens of other delegates had already gathered near the shuttle bay doors, confused and frightened, with no one directing them. A station officer stood near the bay controls, frantically trying to override a jammed door mechanism, sweat on his brow, radio silent, because deck control had stopped answering. "It won't cycle," he said, mostly to himself. "The bay doors won't cycle. The backup power isn't routing." Laura crossed to him in a few quick steps. "Show me the panel." "Or you. Someone who has fixed worse machines than this, with less time. Show me." He hesitated, then stepped aside, and Laura crouched at the exposed panel, scanning the wiring with quick, steady eyes. She found the fault in seconds, a scorched relay that had tripped when the power surged during the breach, and rerouted the circuit by hand, twisting two wires together with a calm precision that made the officer forget, for a moment, to be afraid. The bay door groaned, shuddered, and finally began to slide open. A cheer went up from the gathered crowd, ragged and relieved, and people surged toward the opening shuttle bay. Laura stood back from the panel and let them pass, counting heads without seeming to, making sure the officer went through, making sure Yola and Corin were safely inside the shuttle before she allowed herself to move again. It was only once everyone else was aboard that the deep groan they had heard earlier came again, much louder this time, rolling through the station like a wave. The whole corridor behind them buckled inward with a long, shuddering crash, sealing itself off from the section they had just escaped. Corin, pale and shaking, stared back at the collapsed passage. "We were just there. A minute ago we were just there." "And now we're not," Laura said, stepping into the shuttle and sealing the hatch behind her. "That's the part that matters." The shuttle detached cleanly, drifting into open space alongside a dozen others, all carrying the delegates who had survived the panic in the Grand Assembly Hall. Through the small viewport, the station's outer hull glowed with warning lights where the breach had been, but it held, stable now, the danger already behind them. Yola sat across from Laura, still catching her breath, watching her with new eyes. "You never once looked afraid," she said. "Not from the moment the alarm sounded." "I was afraid," Laura said quietly. "Being afraid and stopping to think are two different things. Where I grew up, the difference between those two things is the difference between living and not living, so you learn to feel the fear and keep walking anyway." "Your world sounds difficult," Corin said. "It sounds impossible when people describe it to you," Laura said, and there was no bitterness in her voice at all, only a kind of quiet, worn patience. "Storms that flatten cities, animals bigger than this shuttle that hunt in packs, diseases that wiped out millions before we understood them. We didn't get a peaceful sky to grow up under. We got weather that wanted us gone, and ground that wasn't always safe to stand on. And still, you helped strangers first," Yola said. "Even when the ground gave you every reason not to." Laura considered that for a moment, watching the station shrink behind them through the viewport. "Maybe that's exactly why," she said. "When your whole world is dangerous, you learn fast that the only thing that keeps a group alive is looking out for each other. It isn't kindness for its own sake. It's the oldest kind of survival there is." The shuttle bay of the rescue vessel opened ahead of them, bright and steady, and one by one the passengers stepped off into safety, shaken but whole. Laura was the last one out, helping Yola down the ramp with the same steady hand she had offered since the first alarm sounded. Behind her, word had already begun to spread through the survivors, passed quietly from one frightened delegate to another. It was not a story about panic, or about the station, or even about the breach itself. It was a story about the quiet woman who had not run when everyone else did, who had known where the exits were before anyone asked, who had fixed a door with her bare hands while an officer stood frozen beside her. Nobody used the word predator. Nobody needed to. They only knew that when everything on that station had gone wrong at once, the calmest person in the room had been the one from the world that never let her feel safe in the first place. And somehow, because of that, everyone around her had made it out alive.